Good day. You are now watching the second instructional resource we are giving to the faculty members of BPSU College of Medicine. I am Dr. Abby Jennifer Tamayo Tolentino, and the focus of my presentation is the instructional design. Instructional design is basically a lesson plan. It shows the content or topic of a course, subject, or session, and the learning outcomes that should be achieved at the end of the instruction. It also describes the teaching strategies and resources that are going to be used during the instruction and the methods by which the students or learners will be tested, assessed, or evaluated. Instructional design is also a roadmap. It is not limited to itemizing or listing down the different elements of an instruction, but it should clearly demonstrate how a course, a subject, or a unit of instruction is going to be implemented or facilitated. It should further describe the progression of learners from one topic to another until completion of the course and achievement of the learning outcomes, as well as the constructive alignment and integration of all of its elements. How is instructional design different from a course syllabus? They are different in two aspects: content and purpose. Syllabus provides an overview of how the course will be run. Of course, it contains the learning outcomes, a general description of the learning activities and strategies, and how the students will be assessed. The schedule, resources, faculty in charge are also included. However, it is not as detailed as an instructional design because the purpose of the syllabus is to guide the students, whereas the purpose of instructional design is to guide the faculty members on how they are going to implement the course or deliver their instruction, especially in medicine, where almost all subjects are taught by a team of teachers. Instructional design is critical for these scenarios to ensure that the curriculum is delivered towards the achievement of the culminating outcomes. Di ba, the usual practice is, Doc, itong topic na ito ang i-lecture mo. Hindi na ganoon. Ganito na tayo dapat. Doc, itong topic na ito ang ituro mo. Ito ang outcomes niyan. Sa dulo ng pagtuturo mo, dapat ang students marunong na nito, kaya na niyang gawin ito. Itong strategy na ito ang tingin namin pinaka-appropriate para ma-achieve yung outcomes. Pati sa assessment, ganito. Sabay bigay ng instructional design. Yun ang purpose ng instructional design. That is why, in terms of content and extent, it contains more details than a course syllabus. Again, the focus of this presentation will be instructional design, particularly its elements and the steps when doing instructional design. For the learning outcomes, at the end of this session, we should be able to appreciate the learning process and adult learning theories underlying the process of designing instruction. The most commonly used instructional design model is the ADDIE framework, with each letter representing one step in the process of designing instruction. A is analysis, D is design, the other D is develop, I is implement, and E is evaluate. As we can see in this figure, the process of designing instruction is sequential, and it has to start from a analysis, particularly if you are developing a entirely new curriculum. What I particularly like about this representation is that evaluate is placed on the center, reflecting that evaluation is something that we should do at any point in the process. The double-ended arrows represent that evaluation in instructional design does not only mean evaluating the learners, but also evaluating the design itself. ADDIE framework is the most commonly used because it also reflects the four elements of instructional design. The four elements of instructional design are situational analysis, learning outcomes, learning activities, and student evaluation. The four elements of instructional design correspond to four questions that need to be answered sequentially when designing instruction. Situational analysis answer the question, where are we now? Answering this question will help us establish the instructional context where learning will occur and also analyze who the learners are. The learning outcomes answer the question, where are we going? This refers to the formulation of the outcomes that will guide the learning. Learning activities answer the question, how do we get there? Answering this question will aid in determining the content of the instruction, the teaching learning strategy to deliver the content, and the resources that are needed to implement the instructional design. And the student evaluation answers the question, how do we know if we have arrived? This refers to the method that will be used to assess whether the outcomes have been achieved or not. In this specific presentation, we will focus on the first element, which is situational analysis. There will be separate lectures for each of these elements, and there will be workshops in between so that as we discuss each of these steps, we also go through it to produce our course syllabi. I mentioned earlier the difference between ID and syllabus. The principles, steps, elements remain the same, but their main difference lies in their content, extent, and purpose. I just want to emphasize that again. Situational analysis again answers the question, where are we now? At this point, I want to clarify that although the emphasis and practice of OBE is defining the outcomes first, then the rest of the elements will follow, the instructional context still has to be largely considered. Whatever educational approach or curriculum design is used, understanding where and when will learning takes place is important. It is also important to consider who will undergo the learning process and who will deliver the instruction. Why are these things important? So the following slides will explain why, but I'd like us to keep in mind the two premises of OBE. First premise is that all students can learn and succeed, but not on the same day in the same way, taking into account the differences between and among learners. And the second premise is that successful learning rests on the students having a strong cognitive and psychological foundation of their prior learning. In situational analysis, we look into the instructional situation. We should consider the key participants in the learning activity, which are the learners or the students. We should take into account the differences in their cognitive styles, approach to learning, and the prior learning that we have. We also need to consider the existing conditions that surround and support learning, including the teachers, the current curriculum and the subject or course to be taught, and the resources that are available and those that are not. Situational analysis is founded on two learning theories, cognitive and behavioral learning theories. One of the most essential contribution of cognitive learning theories is the information processing theory, which tells us that learning is an internal process. It explains the development of cognitive structures and representations that mediate between instruction and learning. So, simplified version, it goes like this. The brain, through our receptors, receives information from the external environment, and these information are converted into electrochemical messages and sent to the brain. The sensory register screens the information, and only those that are related to our previous knowledge, values, beliefs, and expectations get stored in the working memory or the short-term memory. It stays there for some time, and depending on the relevance of the information, those that are highly relevant go to the long-term memory, where we can store it for a very long time until it generates a behavioral response from us. The response is sent to the effectors, which in turn affect the environment. Gagne's information processing theory emphasizes two things. First, since learning is an internal process and it is influenced by certain conditions, for example, previous knowledge, values, beliefs, and expectations of the learners, which are different for each learners, then analyzing their characteristics, approach to learning, etc., will be helpful in the design of instruction. Second, even though learning is an internal process, the stimulus which activates this process comes from the external environment. That is why analyzing the existing conditions where learning will take place will also be helpful in the design of instruction and to ensure that the learning process will take place. These are further supported by behavioral learning theories. Similar with information processing theory, learning starts from an external stimulus. Here in this framework, it is emphasized that the stimulus is provided by the instructor. The stimulus will generate a response from the learner, and then feedback to the response is provided again by the instructor, which in turn will serve as another stimulus. Behavioral learning theories postulate that learning is a behavior change, and as such, the characteristics of the learners play a role in the learning process. The role of the teachers are equally important. That is why we also analyze the characteristics of the teachers, their expertise, their teaching learning skills, etc. as part of the situational analysis. So how do these factors directly affect the design of the instruction? For the characteristics of the learners, different cognitive styles and approach to learning require consideration in the choice of our teaching strategies. But it's not just about choosing what's the most appropriate, but ensuring that varied learning activities will be used to provide for these differences. This is supported by one of the OBE principles, which is expanded opportunity. Meanwhile, prior learning influenced the selection and organization of content. I also keep mentioning that learning builds on what the students already know. And to be honest, it's just going to be a waste of everyone's time if we include content that's already known to them. We could have used the time better if we use it for other content or putting that specific content into a learning activity that promotes higher level of performance. However, it is critical that students be in the same level when it comes to prior learning so that everyone will start at the same place. And this is where NP competences will come in. For existing conditions, characteristics of teachers, their ability, expertise, and experience influence the content to be taught. And that is the prime reason why we invite experts to do lectures of certain topics because that is their mastery. It also influences the choice of teaching strategies and assessment method. Of course, we cannot ask a teacher to facilitate a small group discussion if he or she doesn't know how to do it. In the same manner, we cannot request a teacher to assess their students via OSCE or workplace-based assessment if he or she is not trained to do it. And that is why an inherent part of the curriculum is capacity building program for teachers. The existing curriculum, the design approach, also influence the learning outcomes, the activities, and assessment, which are further affected by availability of resources and existing constraints. In the choice of learning activities and assessment methods, we should consider whether it is feasible to implement it or not. Otherwise, we may have to use a different method if it's not feasible. So all of these factors have to be taken into account when designing instruction. Situational analysis should always be the first step rather than an afterthought. After situational analysis, the next step is formulating the learning outcomes. To answer the question, where are we going? Third step is to design the learning activities. And the last is to plan for student evaluation. So again, there will be separate presentation for the remaining three steps in designing instructions. For now, I will end here. And to orient you, to orient everyone for the workshop on Wednesday, we will have a short brainstorming activity to describe the context of learning, characteristics of learners, and their entry competencies. So again, we will be having a brainstorming activity on Wednesday, but you can start thinking of keywords or descriptors that describe any of these already. So with that, thank you, and you may proceed to the next presentation.